I nodded at Kevin here to my left, my next hostage. And Kevin and I grew up in East Belfast together. I was in the same class as his brother Fergus at school. We all were scattered out of East Belfast at the same time. Had to leave our homes. I lived in a house that was in a cage when we left it. We went to a small Catholic church in Sydenham at that stage. I remember the windows coming in during midnight mass. And it was something that you said, David, a moment ago, that I think in that period we just got on with it. I don't remember any big discussions at a family level about all of that, other than it had happened and we were now at the what next. And, I was speaking to my sister just a couple of months ago, and she said, I thought we were going to die that night the church was attacked. She remembers the priest opening the door to go outside and thinking to herself as a child, why is he opening the door? But I think probably more about that today than I did in the early 1970s. And I was just wondering, Kevin, was that your experience? Was it your family experience? Was it something you thought deeply about then, or is it something you think much more about now? It's Kevin Cooper.
Well, the slight difference probably between us was I grew up in a working class community. My father was a full-time official. My mother was from Donegal, so we were a cross-border family. But we had, my mother and father met during the Second World War. My mother was working for the Ministry of Defence, believe it or not, because she and her sister had moved to Belfast to live with a great aunt off the Bloomfield Road. And the reason we ended up in East Belfast is when my mother and father married, there was no housing. It was during the Second World War. So they lived with my great aunt, who was married to a German clockmaker, a Beringer. She was from a famous jeweller's family. And so we grew up in, firstly, Ashland Park beside Ashfield Boys School, and then Sydenham Gardens off the Hollywood Road.
Not a kick in the backside from that
Yes.
little church that I described, yeah.
And what Barney and I spoke of yesterday morning was the number of families, which were very few Catholic families that lived in that immediate area. And we listed between us, I think, about a dozen families. And we all know, as in Barney and I know different things that happened to all those families. Now, I also know, because of where I came from, where I grew up, my best friend in Ashland Park went on to become a commander in the UVF. I went to school in Hollywood, and I played football in Park Barracks.
Palace Barracks at that stage.
It's the well-known barracks for people think of in trouble, where people were taken to be interrogated. But in those days, it was an open camp. We just walked onto the camp and played full and played. In fact, we're at MI5, probably now have the building, football. So we played football with kids from the camp who were at school with us. And there was nothing unusual with that. But I do remember sectarianism existed, because Ashfield Boy, or Sullivan Upper, quite often would attack children from our school going to school. I can remember a famous incident when my brother, Aidan, who was older, got off a bus because we were invited off by grammar school boys. And he asked me not to come with him, because we would have, as a family, acted as a family. He told me to bring the other kids to school, so I went off, brought the other kids to school. But I can remember a complaint from that school that primary school boys had picked a fight with this school. So this was my upbringing. But I went to secondary school in North Belfast, to Barney Gay. Barney, as it's colloquially known as, St. Patrick's. The people I went to school with became commanders in provision IRA and official IRA. And I was viewed as a man from over the bridge. They had no concept of someone from a Catholic background who could live in East Belfast.
Of course.
And this is, you know, my mother and father continued to live in Sydenham Gardens. My sister died about 5-6 years ago. She continued to live in Sydenham Gardens. But all the boys had to get out. When we came of age, we had to move. We first moved with the grant that we used to get going to university, paid us to move into student flats. And we only visited after that because it was not plainly safe for us as boys to be living in East Belfast. And the respect that my father had, the house was never attacked because he was well respected within the broader trade union movement in Northern Ireland. My family history is legendary in the trade union movement. My father was president of the Belfast Trades Council. He was chair of Armagh Prison Visitors. The WA was mentioned. He was the regional secretary of the WA. He left a working class man who left school at 14, but had a huge respect for education, huge respect. All us kids, even me who's dyslexic, went to third level education. And that was because of my father's belief in education is how working class people better themselves. They better themselves through working conditions in the trade union movement, but they better themselves through education. And everybody should have the chance to the best of their ability to rise to that ability. So my understanding as a family was the people who were involved in these movements were involved because other people were pulling their chains.
They were dragged in.
Yes.
Yeah.
They weren't of that nature when I grew up with them. They became of that nature because others pulled their chains.
Part of the circumstance of that time. Kevin, I know that wasn't easy, and thank you very much for sharing that story with us.